One of the greatest advantages Republicans have in the United States right now is that the media and Democrats are in such a bubble that they are constantly caught off guard to stories. They're constantly caught off guard as to issues. In the first hour of the program, I was talking about the Democrats' proposal that allows the IRS to get data on any bank account or Venmo account or Cash App account, credit unions, you name it, where there are $600 worth of transactions. In talking about that, it generated so many phone calls. It was like we were talking about Obamacare back in 2010 or Common Core back when parents were revolting against Common Core. I mean, the phones light up about this issue. People care passionately about this issue. And it's an issue that catches the Democrats off guard because it's not something that Democrats pay attention to, in large part because everyone they know agrees with them. They think it's a fine idea, and they don't realize that there's a voter rebellion against the idea coming because they don't know any voters. It's like Pauline Kael, the critic from the New York Times, who was shocked when she went to bed and woke up to Richard Nixon's reelection because nobody she knew voted for Richard Nixon. How could this be? The media is in this bubble. They're all Pauline Kael these days. Last year, it was defund the police. We spent a year watching small businesses protest to reopen and the media condemned them. And then you had the George Floyd protests where people were in the streets without masks on and the media thought, who cares about the virus? It's your civil right. Burn that business down. It's not violence. They got insurance. This was the media, the fiery but mostly peaceful protests. They never saw the backlash coming, and the backlash came. Again, Republicans were expected to be wiped out. Republicans were expected to lose state legislatures and governor's mansions. They not only didn't, but they picked some up along the way. And they came within a few seats of picking up the House of Representatives when everybody's polling, the Democrats and the Republicans, said a Democratic wave was coming. They came very close. They would have held on to the Senate, except for the Republicans in Georgia giving up. The media never saw it coming. The Democrats never saw it coming because the media and the Democrats, they feed off of each other. And in so doing, they get blindsided. So let me read you a headline. This is from the New York Times. And Philip, this is what you want to send to Rev. This is the headline. The unlikely issue shaping the Virginia governor's race. The unlikely issue shaping the Virginia governor's race. The unlikely issue. What do you think that issue is? It's unlikely. If it's an unlikely issue, it's an issue you didn't see coming. It's an issue nobody expected. It's an issue no one thought would be a big deal. It's unlikely. What is the issue? Schools. The headline. The unlikely issue shaping the Virginia governor's race, schools. Subheadline. Virginia Republicans in a tight governor's race have been staging Parents Matter rallies and tapping into conservative anger over mandates and critical race theory. Only the left would think this issue is unlikely. You've had a year of lockdowns. In Northern Virginia, local school boards condemned parents for hiring tutors last year. When schools were shut down last year in Virginia, wealthier parents, black and white, hired tutors for their kids. In a lot of cases, the parents pooled their money and the tutors tutored lots of kids at one time. In many cases, well-documented cases, A lot of conscientious parents realize there are kids in my kid's class who can't afford this. I'm going to invite them over and I'll take care of it, or we'll pool our money together so that everybody shares the costs, so that the disadvantaged kids are advantaged. And the school boards condemned them. And they kept the school shut down. And parents were exposed to what their kids were learning through Zoom calls when they worked. And the school boards were unapologetic. And then they went back to school, and even the kindergartners were forced to put masks on. And for a while there, they didn't know they were going to have school. And the kids are behind. Then it turns out the schools in Virginia, despite Terry McAuliffe, the gubernatorial candidate there for the Democrats, despite Terry McAuliffe denying it, the schools in Virginia have been teaching critical race theory. They've been teaching the kids when they come into school, and the parents heard it. The parents were on the Zoom calls. The parents could hear it last year. They weren't teaching kids to read. They weren't teaching kids to write. They weren't teaching kids math. They were teaching kids that they're victims or victimizers. They weren't teaching American history. They were teaching repackaged 1619 nonsense. And parents started showing up at school boards. And the school boards reacted nastily to having parents show up and tell them how to do their jobs. And now, the former governor of Virginia, running for governor again, Terry McAuliffe, at a debate says he didn't believe parents should be able to tell schools how to do their jobs. And they should not be allowed to go to school boards and tell school boards what to do. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. It's offensive to him that anyone would go to the school board and tell the schools that they shouldn't be teaching critical race theory, that they should be opening the schools, that their elementary school kids shouldn't have to wear masks. And he doubled down on it as well. McAuliffe has doubled down on all of this. And now the New York Times believes that this issue is an unlikely issue. Have they not paid attention? This is Lisa Lehrer in the New York Times. As a lifelong Republican in her home state of Virginia, Tammy Yoder faithfully casts her ballot for those who want to lower taxes, oppose abortion, and back other conservative causes. But the issue that transformed Ms. Yoder, a stay-at-home mother, from a reliable voter to the kind of person who brings 3 young children to an evening campaign rally, wasn't her Christian values or her pocketbook. It was something even more personal, she said, what her children learn in school. The last year has revealed a ton to me, says Ms. Yoder, 41, as she waited in the Northern Virginia exurb for a speech by Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate for governor. The more I've listened and paid attention, the more I see what's happening in schools and on college campuses, and the stuff I see, I don't want corrupting my children. From fights over evolution to desegregation to prayer, education battles have been a staple of the country's divisive cultural issues for decades, but not quite like this. After months of closed classrooms and lost learning time, Republicans in Virginia are making the schools the focus of their final push to capture the governor's office, hoping to rally conservatives around both their frustrations over mask mandates and mandatory vaccinations and their fears of what their children are being taught. Vocal groups of parents, some led by Republican activists, are organizing against school curricula, opposing public health measures, and calling for recalls of school board members. Mr. Youngkin, a former private equity executive, has capitalized, seizing on conservatives' concerns about instruction on race and the rights of transgender children to argue that Democrats want to come between parents and their children's education. Mr. Youngkin's attacks have forced Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic former governor trying to win back his old job, onto the defense and have thrust the ordinarily local issues surrounding schools into the middle of a rancorous nationwide shouting match. The Virginia race offers an early electoral test of that conservative energy. That's why the Democrats are paying attention now. They're scared, and they should be. Here's an independent voter on CNN.
Let's dig deeper. This is one of the voters you spoke to, Amy Dodson, who says she's a true independent. Listen.
I'm historically an independent voter. I have voted every which way you could vote. What led me to vote for Glenn Youngkin this time around was education.
Was education. Polling in Virginia from CBS News shows 65% of voters, their number one issue, education. 65%. Education. This is an issue that is blowing up against the Democrats. Now, I don't need to reread for you the New York Times story. I'll just reread the subheading. Virginia Republicans in a tight governor's race have been staging Parents Matter rallies and tapping into conservative anger. Virginia is not 60 to 65% conservative. It's not. It's become a blue state. And the New York Times focuses on lifelong Republican Tammy Yoder and Republican rallies and Republican activists leading groups of parents. But that's not the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is there are way more than Republicans mad about this. There are way more than Republicans enraged about this. And the Democrats can't help themselves and the media can't help themselves because they are spun up into the same universe, into the same bubble. They don't realize it's an issue or they have too late. Terry McAuliffe is running in Virginia and he's trying to tie Glenn Youngkin to Donald Trump. They're actually putting up signs. Youngkin equals Trump or Trump equals Youngkin. They're spreading them around Virginia as if voters care. I saw two CNN reporters last night and a Washington Post reporter today positively giddy that Steve Bannon held a rally for Republicans in Virginia. Glenn Youngkin wasn't there, but by God, they pulled all of their might into tying Youngkin to it, including Donald Trump called in and endorsed Glenn Youngkin. Virginia, pay attention. He's Trump. And you know what Youngkin is doing is kind of hilarious. So Raphael Warnock ran in Georgia last year. Far left progressive. And he ran these happy pictures of him with puppies and him with kids, and it was all happy. And how can these people say Warnock's a bad guy? Look at him with the puppies. Look at him with the kids. They were very affable ads. The Republicans tried to paint him as a socialist, communist, anti-American, hates America, hates mom and apple pie. You can't vote for Raphael Warnock. And here are the Warnock ads. I love puppies. I love kids. I love you. When all of the raindrops are gumdrops, I mean, you couldn't run against Warnock because Warnock's ads were endearing. People liked the ads. Independent voters liked the ads. Youngkin's doing the same thing. And Terry McAuliffe's like, he's Trump. He's bad. He's Trump. And Youngkin's like, I love my kids. I love my family. I love my neighborhood. I love Virginia. I love the trees. I love the forest. I love the people. Love the rivers. Love Virginia. It's really hard to demonize that guy. He's barely even talked about the issues. Youngkin's barely talked about the issues. In fact, I was criticizing him months ago saying he's not talking about the issues. Oh, he's talking about the issues now. And he's talking about schools and education, and parents are pissed off, and their school boards are coming after the parents and treating the parents as bad guys. And it's not conservatives. And this is where the New York Times and the Democrats get it wrong. And this is how the Republicans are making inroads in a blue state like Virginia. They've convinced themselves it's just Republicans and conservatives who have this problem. It's like they convinced themselves last year that only white conservatives were opposed to defunding the police. Turns out black families really don't want the police defunded, but they're in a bubble and they don't know. And the progressives surround themselves with each other and they give each other attaboys. And they say, this doesn't matter. It's just Fox News. Except the parents showing up at the school board meetings and now showing up at the Youngkin rallies. They read the New York Times and they watch CNN. And they give money to Democrats, and they're voting for Glenn Youngkin. To quote the New York Times, the Virginia race offers an early electoral test of conservative energy. Problem is not the conservative energy. The problem is the pissed off independents who are going to vote with the conservatives because they're tired of the Democrats using schools not to teach their kids, but to indoctrinate their kids. And Virginia will find out how much hell the Democrats will have to pay for doing that. And you know what? They're not going to be able to change in a year. They're not going to be able to turn that ship around. And they're going to be stuck with the results. They will see doom coming if it goes bad for Terry McAuliffe, and they won't be able to get out of the way.